I have a question regarding Palimela talked about this the problem of the politics and the economics, and to the panel in general. I've been listening a lot about this Venezuelan now joining Argentina in the Mercosur arena. So I think talking about politics, that's going to change, and probably is going to even damage more this nationalistic spirit driven by Argentina right now. And I'm worried about that because that's also related to Bolivia. So this is politics, which is really standardizing the way of thought on how Argentina, Bolivia, Venezuela, and perhaps Brazil are going to operate. I don't know much about Pemex, but that's my question. I mean, we need to look at this from an integrated perspective because all these countries are kind of teaming up. They're not working independently.
Let me just say that Venezuela joining Mercosur is terrific for Brazil. There's no benefits in it for Venezuela since Venezuela only exports hydrocarbons. So it's great for Brazilian industry because it means they'll have an advantage exporting to Venezuela. But it's more of a political move than an economic move. I mean, I was actually talking with Gus earlier today. I mean, the grouping I'd keep my eye on is the Alianza del Pacifico, which I think has huge potential, which is Chile, Peru, Colombia, Mexico, with Panama and Costa Rica as associate members, where you've got a group of countries who actually share the same view of how to make their countries grow economically, and therefore will be able to move ahead in a way that all those groupings, whether it's CARICOM or Mercosur or UNASUR or all the groupings in Latin America have been unable to. So.
No, I agree with you completely that's the other group. I was talking about the other, because these are really divided into two, you just mentioned.
Yeah.
And that's really what I see as a problematic for, as you said, is Brazil, which is one of the largest countries in Latin America, and Argentina. Those are the two.
Well, Colombia's going to, by some counting, has already overtaken Argentina. If not, it soon will, because the Colombian economy is growing so quickly relative to the Argentine economy. I'm sorry, you were about to say something, Jeremy?
I was just going to make one quick comment about Venezuela, something very interesting. The opposition candidate has given a speech recently that takes on Venezuela's foreign obligations in terms of basically giving away oil. And I think that's interesting.
I was ambassador in Venezuela. I mean, one thing, as was Jeffrey Davidow, but one of the interesting things to keep in mind is the opposition in Venezuela has never talked about privatizing PDVSA, has no interest in privatizing PDVSA. It will not happen. What they're talking about is that PDVSA is not being run properly, but not that PDVSA should be privatized. Yes, sir.
I'm Cy Franklin from San Diego World Affairs Council. My question is directed to Joe. If you're able, would you like to comment on how the Europeans might view that situation, those countries that are likely to default on their bonds?
Well, I'm not I'm not an expert on the Argentine economic situation per se, but I know that there's issues associated with that default on the market, and for example, the U.S. Exim Bank does not make loans in Argentina given the situation with the Paris Club. I don't know. I don't know if David or Pamela or anyone else has any thoughts about the European element.
I think from an investor's perspective, especially if you're thinking about doing something big that's expensive and it's fixed to the ground so you can't leave if things get bad, which would be the true for a big shale investment and so on, that the sovereign default is not as problematic as the various kinds of de facto nationalization or expropriation that we've seen. That's a bigger worry. because if you're a private investor, you've got to look at sovereign default, and you're worried about the impact of that on the currency and a bunch of other things and so on. But there are a lot of ways to hedge that kind of risk. The real risk you're worried about is that the government's going to, for whatever reason, think you're not doing the right thing, or it's going to have adopted some other stupid policy like the one that Jeremy described, and then it's going to blame you for that policy. That's the big concern.
David Gaddis-Smith. So if all the nationalism can get worked out for the to do the shale exploration in northern Mexico, I guess organized crime has had, I guess, at least some impact on Pemex. What kind of impact would you expect that to have on any of this natural gas exploration?
The natural gas fields are in a number of regions, and there's one region in Veracruz and Tamaulipas around Tampico where it's hard to develop it precisely because of organized crime. But the other ones are in Chihuahua and in Coahuila, and it's much more feasible, and that's actually the bigger field, and that's the one I assume the government's going to try to. They're thinking about trying to generate lot leases for that area.
Can I ask a question? Why, if gas is so cheap in the United States, why wouldn't you just import gas? Why would Mexico import gas?
Jeremy can probably answer that question better than I can, because he just wrote a paper on that. But it has to do with a lack of infrastructure to be able to import the gas from the United States. I don't know if you want to add on to that.
Lack of infrastructure, but I'll also add, what's the title of our panel tonight? Energy nationalism. I mean, honestly, there's an energy security. There is a seeding. What you would have to do is basically seed a little bit of your patrimony to rely upon, albeit a cheaper source. I mean, it really comes down to, do you want to become dependent upon cheap, quote unquote, gringo gas?
Well, the Bolivian answer to that would be, we'll keep our patrimony in the ground for the future and use up yours.
David, I think.
So the big part of the Bolivian this investment is driven by these prices that Nelson was talking about. The Bolivian gas export projects are kind of wacky economically to begin with, but they are driven by a market that is indexing the price of gas back to contracts that are de facto linked to the price of oil, because even for Brazil, things will change a little bit when some of the gas offshore Sao Paulo comes online. That could be catastrophic for Bolivia. But in the Brazilian and the Argentine context, the alternative is to import LNG, and all the cargo, spot cargo, certainly in the Atlantic Basin for LNG, are more or less pricing off Europe right now, and that's more or less means they're linked to the price of oil, which means, in non-wonky terms now, $8 or $10 per million BTU for a cargo, whereas we are seeing $3 per million BTU for gas at the Henry Hub in the United States. So I would be shocked if people did any significant shale gas in Mexico until U.S. gas prices, which is the comparable market, come up, because already in the United States, under ideal commercial conditions, a large fraction, maybe half, of the shale gas wells are not economic. They're being drilled for other reasons. They're being drilled to hold on to lease, to drill or lose provisions and leases and so on. And the big leaders in this area, like Chesapeake, are just going through financial bloodshed right now. So I think, in addition to nationalism and so on, just kind of from a straight economic perspective, it's very hard to see how somebody would spend a lot of money on those particular fields.
I would beg to differ. And it would have to do with two things. One, the idea of, if Pemex were going to invest there, it would be in order to send a signal that Pemex is moving away from deep water in Chicontepec, where they haven't been very successful. We've got 25 dry wells in deep water so far. In Chicontepec, they've invested $9 billion for a trickle of oil. So it's an idea of finding a place where Pemex can show to the Mexican public that the new president is being able to run the company more effectively, and we're able to generate some gas. The other thing is, can you actually get foreign petroleum companies to invest in this? And many of them have the strategy of, I will invest in loss losers in Mexico to get my toe in the door so that I can get into that market for when that market opens up more broadly. And we've seen that Petrobras' investments in deep water drilling, they've lost billions in that. But they continue to involve themselves in that because because they want to be there when that market opens up more broadly. So I don't disagree that it's not going to suddenly be a dramatic investment, but I think to suggest that there is there isn't going to be any investment simply because you have an oversupply in the U.S. market, it would be incorrect. Plus, you're not supplying the U.S. market, you're supplying the Mexican market because you don't have the infrastructure ties between the two.
Let me say briefly on this. I know you want to ask another question. First of all, gas price in Mexico is indexed off Henry Hub, so at the margin, this is really, it's not about where physically the gas comes from, it's where the economic opportunity lies. And there is no overlap between the skill set you need to do a frack job and the skill set that Pemex has. I mean, there's just zero overlap. So they would have to contract all the activity out, so maybe there would be kind of a theatrical value to doing that. And the majors have been putting this toe in the water for Mexico for a long time, but they're really waiting to see whether there's some kind of plausible, constitutionally coherent strategy that Mexico has to allow them to take equity stakes and so on. And until that exists, which I think doesn't exist right now, there are not going to be many folks who are going to do what Petrobras has done, which I believe the folks at Petrobras believe was not wise.
The one thing I'd say about Petrobras is I saw an interesting headline recently that called what's happening there the Pemexification of Petrobras, which I think was a very interesting way of summing up a lot of what we've talked about.
We advertised that we were going to end at 7:30. We're right at 7:30. A great question, and right here.
Yes, one question to Pamela. With your expertise, you foresee any legal problems between Mexico's oil company and the U.S. private companies in deep water exploitation of extracting of oil in the Gulf of Mexico because of I believe the oil is all over. How can you determine who's extracting oil from what part of the Gulf of Mexico, if it belongs to Mexico or if it belongs to the U.S.?
The United States and Mexico in May just negotiated agreement precisely to manage those cross-border fields. So until May, that was a problem. But after that, they have a treaty that manages the cross-border fields.
Good. I want to thank the panel. This has been extraordinary, useful and meaty conversation, I think, with really some good issues discussed here. And I want to thank the audience for coming at this time of day for this kind of discussion when you could be home watching soap operas and sitcoms. This is and our mayoral candidates debating on the local news. Anyhow, let's give a round of applause to our panel. You guys are great. David, Pamela, Nelson, Jeremy, thank you very much. I hope they'll stay around for a few minutes. I know David's got to run, but everybody else is going to stay for a few minutes and corner them and get the answers to your questions. Thank you all.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Thank you. Good to see you. Thank you. How's your back? What do you do? Okay.
Yeah, I